Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Counterpoint 1. The Art of Counterpoint is now focusing on canon, and we're getting a little bit of experience with this by writing a round first, and which we've just looked at. Now we're going on to something a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complex. This is sometimes called a canon, which is another way of saying generally speaking, this is a law or a rule, but also a canon is a particular musical device which has one line that can be played against itself. In this case, there's going to be one line that you hear first for two measures, and then it's going to be followed by the exact same thing an octave higher. So there's two important intervals in a canon. One is the distance of the imitation, in this case at the octave, and there's also the time distance. There's two measures. So this is, when you look at the score, this may seem unusual to you, but this was originally written in 4/2, and that says something about the origins of the piece itself. This is by Jan Sweelinck, and who was a Dutch composer from the late Renaissance to the early Baroque. His life actually sort of has, musically, has things of both worlds of the Renaissance and the Baroque. He's born around 1562 and dies around 1621. So we think of the Baroque period as starting roughly around 1600. So Sweelinck's one of the first most important keyboard composers, and he spawns a whole series of very interesting music for organ in the Baroque period, culminating with a lot of the great works of Bach for organ. So let me play this canon and see if you can follow the imitation. It should be a little bit difficult after the first entrance, right? We have two measures, and then we have the imitation beginning at the octave. But unlike just an imitation or an imitation period in a piece of music, this is going to be imitative all the way through. This is a characteristic of the canon. It is imitative from beginning to end. Now, there's only 17 measures in this, and what you'll see is that one line, the following line, is imitative all the way to the very end. But the starting line, or the subject, begins two measures by itself, and then it's going to end two measures before the end. So what happens with this line as we get to the end? Well, it's going to be in free counterpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean you can use any note that you want at the end, but it usually prepares the cadence of the final notes. Now, you also might not realize that I have transcribed this piece for you. Originally it was in alto clef and bass clef. I know some of you really love alto clef, but I changed it to treble clef at any rate, for your benefit. This only goes to show that there was very little difference in Sweelinck's time between something that was a vocal piece written in a voice clef and something that was in fact a keyboard piece. I would like you to keep this in mind as you write your own canons. They should ultimately all be singable. Even if they end up being pieces that we play on the keyboard, it's really imperative that you be able to sing them. And I'm certain that's what Sweelinck would have wanted us to do with his piece. That is, he would want us to play it as though we were singing it. So here's what it sounds like. imitation? I don't think so. You're not supposed to. In fact, if you can hear the technique, that's usually a bad sign. What you want to hear is the music flowing from beginning to end, and the technique is something that should be somewhat hidden, at least from an audience perspective. Sometimes even that's the case. It should be hidden from the person who's even playing it or singing it. They may not quite realize it's a canon. So I think that we will talk about ways in which you can disguise the technique, and I think that would be most helpful. Now, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the imitation is reharmonized, and things change once the imitation comes in. It does not stay necessarily in the same mode or the same key, but it doesn't really modulate at the same time. So exactly what does it do? What happens is that the intervals change. So at first we might have, let's say, a third when the imitation comes in, and then that's not just inverted to a sixth, but it might be in an entirely different interval altogether when it's played against itself after two measures. So let's listen to it one more time, and then we can take a look at the score and talk more about how you might do something like this. Let's listen once more. Okay, now what is happening here, which is of interest to us, is that this gradually gets higher and it gets faster. We've seen this kind of technique in species counterpoint. In fact, one of the reasons why I picked this is because it has so many of the elements of fifth species counterpoint. It has suspensions, it has ornamented suspensions, and passing tones. There's an occasional neighbor note, but for the most part, almost everything here is basically in Dorian mode, and it continues to spin out in a single line that is attractive in and of itself. It gradually gets higher, as I said, gradually gets faster, and then you have a preparation for the conclusion at the end. So I hope you have your score in front of you, because I'd like to go through this and show you in more detail exactly how this works on paper.